Uh, so let me officially welcome you to NNJR's first event of 2021 at Lightning and New Jersey Motorsports Park. So tonight I'm going to provide some tips on vision and situational awareness targeted for people who've driven on track. Some of this, there's a few things here you may have seen before, but there's also some new items that I've come across. So hopefully you'll find it useful. In addition, after that, we'll talk about lightning turn by turn. And in all cases, for those of you that haven't attended these sessions in the past, please ask a question at any time and interrupt me. I don't mind being interrupted at all. The key thing is that you understand what I'm saying, and if there's any doubt about it or you have any questions, please ask. I'll repeat what I said a moment ago. If your video is off, I can't see you. I have my Zoom settings to only see the people who have video on. So if your video is off, that's fine. But that means when you have a question, you either have to jump in or you have to raise your virtual hand with the Zoom virtual hand feature. So either one of those will work. I'm not offended by any questions. So let me start with a couple of stories and a couple of questions. I think it was 2019, it might have been 2018. I'm driving at Watkins Glen in, I think it was a black run group. And I exit turn one, and a fast Cayman, comes blasting through turn one on my bumper, expecting a pass signal, but I had slowed down. There was a black flag at the flag station entering turn one. Those of you who have driven in Watkins Glen know there's a flag station at the end of the pit straight. The driver in that Cayman did not see the black flag. And, he did see it, I think, at flag station 2, only because he had to hit the brakes to avoid collecting me, to not pass me. Now, has that ever happened before? Unfortunately, yes. And I mean, by the way, the driver of that car apologized to me later and said he made a big mistake, should have seen the flag. But I cannot count how many times as a chief instructor I've had to talk to people who miss black flags, even to the extent of missing a black flag and taking an extra lap because they missed an obvious black flag. So was that a vision problem? Absolutely, that's a vision problem. The black flag was there in the example I cite. I happened to see it. My eyesight is not 20/20. It's no better than the average person's eyesight. So what does that have to do with vision? Well, it has a lot to do with it. So let me cite another story. This happened a few years ago. I'm entering the bus stop. Well, I'm approaching the bus stop just before the braking zone. Well, a little before the braking zone. I give a pass signal to a car that's approaching me rapidly on the back street at Watkins Glen. I look to my right as I get into the braking zone. I can't see the car. So where the heck is this car? I gave him a pass signal, him or her, and I can't see where the car is. Well, I decided, since I couldn't see and I had no idea where they were, that I would go straight through the bus stop, and discretion being the better part. So now, since then, I've learned something about how to adjust mirrors to solve that problem. And if you haven't adjusted your mirrors according to what I'm going to describe, then that's something to think about. So let me just quickly ask, anybody willing to volunteer a time when they had a time on track where they missed something in their vision, they missed something that they should have seen, or that should have maybe, or that could have rather, helped them, drive better? And anyone else willing to volunteer? Tim, let me pick on you. Any thoughts? Tim Barnes.
I have certainly not seen a black flag at the first time a black flag was displayed, and I've picked it up at the next flag station. So that is always a lesson learned, that you may not always be looking at the flag stations as much as you think you're looking at the flag stations.
Yep. Okay, good. Anyone else want to volunteer anything? Well, while you're thinking, let me just ask you to think about, we're going to talk about this later, but how far ahead do we need to look on the track? And when do we need to look at flag stations? And when do we need to look in the mirrors? Those, I covered some of that in sessions last year, but not all of that. But we'll talk about some of that as we go through the session tonight. But for those of you that just joined, please jump in with questions or comments at any time. You can interrupt me verbally or with a virtual hand for those of you that have the video off. So, so I'm going to start up the PowerPoint at this point, but the same rules apply. I'm going to go fast, but please ask if you have any questions at all. So let me see if I can get this going. Okay. Okay. All right, let me do a couple of adjustments here to get my screen where I want it. Zoom always rearranges the screen in ways I would just as soon not appreciate, but okay. All right. Okay, so we're going to talk about vision as situational awareness. I have my normal disclaimer. If you try anything that we talk about tonight and it doesn't work, it's your fault. So, so we're going to cover several topics tonight, and we can cover them in any order, but is vision important on track? Well, I think the answer to that's pretty obvious, but maybe not as obvious as you might think. So we'll dive into what does it really mean to look on track? And in particular, we're going to focus on, can you improve your vision on track? And I'm going to highlight some ways you can make your vision worse on track, which may or may not be obvious. Now, in at least 2 or more cases tonight, I'm going to include, I've included slides that are on the website list of slides that are basically homework for those of you interested in knowing more. In particular, what does it mean to look? There's a lot behind that we don't have time to cover tonight. I'm going to gloss over it, but you have the slides, and you can review that as you wish. And the same thing on vision improvement. I'm going to give you several concrete ways you can improve your on-track vision, some of which I've suggested in the past, some of which are new. And but I'm not going to go through that in detail. I'm going to go through it at light speed tonight, so that we have time to talk about turn by turn and other things. But that doesn't mean I'm not open to questions. Please, jump in if you have any questions. So Why is vision important on the track? Well, lots of reasons, right? We need to look at where we're going and focus on where we're going. Pretty obvious. We need to see the line. I'll talk more about that. And specifically, we need to know where the reference points are and see the reference points. There's lots of safety issues on track. We're going to spend time on situational awareness, flag stations, traffic. That is probably the factor that catches out new drivers on track more than anything else. Yes, they come to the track knowing that they're going to be driving at a faster speed than on the highway and all that. But the whole issue of traffic and flag stations and all that, that's a big deal. And as many of you have heard me say, every time you move up a run group, that all changes. Things happen much faster. Your situational awareness has to go up yet another notch. Depth perception is much more important than we may give it credit for. You can think of this as a combination of your peripheral vision and your vision, but depth perception tells us speed, it tells us distance. It's really, really important looking ahead. It's even more important looking in the mirrors. But the really important point from this quick introduction is, what we see is what our eyes process, but what we can react to and what we can do on track has nothing to do with what our eyes see. It has to do with what our brains process and then what our brain tells our hands and feet to do. And I want to pause there for just a moment, because vision is not just an issue of what we see. Our human eyes can get information to the human brain pretty quickly, but the time it takes the brain to process and the body to react is really what makes a difference on the track. And think about what that means. Think about your experience, okay, from when you were a beginner on track to where you are now. You can, quote, react a lot faster to things, right? Well, it's because you've seen it before. Your brain has a pattern. You fit it into a model, if you will, and you know what to do. But we'll say more about that as we go ahead. It really depends on that processing, in the brain. So with that said, if I can get this to move ahead. I'm sure everyone here has heard all of this classic advice, look ahead, look where we want to go, use lots of reference points, use our peripheral vision, and lots more, right? Well, is that enough? Well, maybe for beginners, that's enough. And the class I'm going to teach on Wednesday night is going to spend time on those. But I want to suggest tonight that we can do better than that. So let me start with, what does it mean to look? So some of you have seen this before. What it means to look, focus. There are actually 4 dimensions to what it means to look. Focus is where our eyes focus, our central vision. It's something that requires a fair amount of time, a second or more, maybe a little less if it's something that's familiar, but it really takes a certain amount of time. It's a very narrow range, 3 to 5 degrees. Most of our vision is not our focus. It's 3% of what your vision is looking at any point in time. Peripheral vision is kind of the rest. It's everything that's around that. It's to our sides, to surrounding us. Now, we can glance using that focus for a half second or less. we can get a quick glance at something, moving our focus and moving it back. And then really importantly is our mental vision, our mind's eye of what we're looking at. So, sorry about that. All right, so come on. So here's a section I'm not going to spend time on, but there's a section here on how the eyes work, what the implications of that are, and including peripheral vision. So here is a nice diagram of focus and zones around it. Here's some of the implications of that really make a difference in terms of how we look. When we can see color, when we can see motion, and so on. Our peripheral vision, really critical on track, but less detail, doesn't show us as much as our focus does, but critical for what we do on track, critical for depth perception. So how do we see a corner? Now, if you listen to Dennis Mascio speak at the monthly meeting back in December, he talked about this verbally. I've put it on a slide. He said a curve requires 3 points. Pretty basic, right? But our eyes need to see that whole corner. And when we see that corner in our mind, we have more confidence about getting around it. So he said our ocular driving, which many of you have heard that term before, means our primary vision, our peripheral vision, and most importantly, our memory of what that corner should look like. And he talked about driving it blindfolded. He did an exercise where he drove blindfolded up against the wall at Pocono, which I don't plan to try to repeat, but he talked about doing that. So what does that look like? Well, if we put the cones out on the track, you get this point-to-point thing, right? Which beginners tend to drive like this. They tend to drive point-to-point to the turn-in, apex, and track out. But in our mind, we see the curve. Now, this seems pretty basic, but you all do this probably naturally, but it's really important to think about it, particularly in the context of some of the things we're going to talk about later. In your mind's eye, you need to be able to see that corner and visualize exactly where you're going to drive. And when you put that in action, it looks like this. So this is a really interesting diagram. So you see in this diagram that the focus, I'm going to see if I can get this to work or not. The focus here is on the apex. You could argue it could be the apex or in the braking, but it's right here, the focus, tiny spot, right? Now, our mental picture is what we just talked about. If I can, it's this whole curve, this orange line here, this curved line. But we can glance ahead at where we're going to exit the corner. And our peripheral vision is going to show us the turn-in point so we know where to turn in. Now, if you take nothing else away from tonight, this explanation of what vision looks like on the track is really critical, because you cannot drive well on the track unless all 4 of these dimensions are working as they should.
Bill, can I add something? This is Doug.
Yeah, sure.
So if you go back to that slide, I had a realization not too long ago, not driving on the track, but driving in a simulator. And I was driving on a track where I was having a hell of a time trying to figure out where a brake marker was, because a reference point for that, because the track was completely featureless in the area where I wanted to start braking. And eventually I realized that there was a power pole well off the track, and a building about a quarter of a mile away And as I approached the braking zone, that power pole sort of visually slid across the face of that building. And I finally figured out that where that power pole needed to be on the building when I wanted to start going to the brakes. So I wasn't even looking at something that was on the track, but it was something well off the track. And in the context of this picture, it was interesting because it was sort of above the apex. So I could look at that and the apex at the same time.
Well, I mean, that's a great example, Doug, because lots of reference points aren't necessarily on track. And those of you that have listened to Peter Krause or particularly looked at some of the virtual track walks he and Ross Bentley do, he uses incredibly arcane reference points exactly like that, to tell you whether you're at the turn-in point or whether your car is at the right attitude and so on. So absolutely correct. It's
I had just never appreciated, I was sort of always focused on looking for reference points on the track or right next to the track. And, if you sort of broaden your horizons, there's things you can learn.
Yes. Well, and that in your case, that happened to be more or less in your line of sight, but oftentimes those references are in your peripheral vision, and your peripheral vision is very powerful. Most of us can see, if not 180 degrees, 150, 160 degrees. And if it's something that doesn't move, like a sign or a tire mark or whatever, it's very easy to pick up. And really, really important. Somebody has some noise in the background. If you don't mind muting your microphone, I'd appreciate it. Other comments here? Because like I said, this is a really important slide to think about when you're thinking about driving on track. Okay. Now, just to reinforce that, Ross Bentley's version of the same thing, right? Exactly the same 4 points. Mental vision, glance, which by the way includes mirrors, flag stations, and so on. Guess what your peripheral vision is really good at? Motion. If your peripheral vision is not very good at picking up lots of details, your peripheral vision cannot discern colors very well. It can discern motion. So if a stationary black flag against a black flag station, it's going to be pretty hard to pick up. Hopefully the flag worker is maybe moving the flag a bit or it's waving in the wind. And then you're going to have a much better chance of picking it up. But again, Ross Bentley's version of exactly the same thing. Now mirrors, critical part of situational awareness. We all know that you need to be aware of the cars behind. Everybody on this call knows that, right? Everybody knows you should never be surprised by a car in the mirror. When we were in green and yellow, if you were like me, you were often surprised by a car behind because you didn't anticipate the closing speed. But guess what? It happens. So when do we look at the mirrors? And I could have put a poll question in here. I didn't, but we want to look at the mirrors, obviously when we're on a straightaway. But what a lot of people forget is you want to look at them at the end of a straightaway. And obviously nobody's going to pass you at the end of a straightaway. You're entering a corner, right? But are cars closer to you than they were before, or are they further away? If a car closed on you dramatically, but they're not quite behind you, guess what? They're probably going to need a pass in the next passing zone. Now, we all know, and we're taught, as green drivers, we want to look in the mirror exiting a corner because that'll give us some sense of how close, if there's a car close behind, how close they may be. But again, looking at the mirrors every few seconds, often. And again, this is a scan. This isn't a focus because the mirror is a scan and we're just trying to see if there's something there. if we glance, the slide, I guess, should have said glance rather than scan, because if we go back to the previous slide, this is one of those glances. Doesn't take our eyes off the road for very long, but long enough to see what's going on, including, by the way, color. We should be able to determine what color that car is in the mirror.
Bill,
Now,
a quick comment.
oh yeah, please.
I've experienced especially when there's a fast car coming in on me, you had mentioned that our peripheral vision sees motion. Our peripheral vision doesn't just go out sideways, it goes out up and down as well. So often you'll catch that motion in your mirror, that unusual motion, not just the track disappearing in your mirror, but something coming into it. So I have seen that, and then a quick glance just verifies, yes, indeed, there's a fast car that needs to take me over.
Yep. No, that's a good point, Zoltan. Thanks for that.
Bill?
Yeah.
Have sort of an instructing question.
Sure.
I've been in a lot of situations where a novice student is just completely rattled by all the cars behind them. And I know one of my instructors once told me, you get in that situation, don't look in the mirror until you get to a passing zone. And to me, that makes sense. I mean, we can look as instructors in the right-hand mirror, we can watch the rear. But I think sometimes people are just so nervous about the traffic that they get rattled and they start making mistakes.
Well, that's correct. And that's why this is a class for advanced drivers, not a class for novices, right? When I talk about vision for novices on Wednesday night, we'll talk about mirrors in a very different way. And in a case like you cite, if a novice is overloaded, you should tell them not to look in the mirror at all. And as an instructor, you should tell them when to give the pass signal. As an instructor, we take over the right side mirror. We know what's going on behind. We need to get the driver comfortable on track. And we've all seen too many as instructors, those of us who instruct, we've seen too many, novice drivers who just get totally flummoxed by the cars in the mirror, and that completely screws up their ability to drive on track. And if it's a driver like that, they don't need to look in the mirror. You should take that responsibility off of their hands. Now, once they get comfortable, then obviously you give it back to them. But to get started with a brand new driver, that is a perfectly fine strategy, because I tell this to novice drivers all the time, and they're still amazed, and they all say the same thing to me. You told me that driving on track, I was going to be surprised by how hard the traffic management was. And they tell me afterwards, I didn't believe you, but now I believe you, right? I mean, that's what happens. It's very tough. We're not used to that level of intensity. And so, but your point's right. The mirror, fixating on the mirror, remember I said scan or glance at the mirror. The new driver may be fixated on the mirror and not even paying attention to what's going on in front of the car. So definitely a problem. Now, speaking of more advanced, at least run groups, I'm going to show you a quick video clip here that shows you what not to do. I'll just be quiet and let you watch. This is VIR, South Bend at VIR, approaching Oak Tree. Me driving, Cayman in front of me. Do I get a pass signal? No. Was I behind him coming out of the corner? Of course. So a faster car closes on him, has to slow down in the middle of a very long straightaway, finally gets a pass signal. And I finally get a pass signal. Now, what's wrong with that picture, right? Everything. So that's pretty egregious example of not watching your mirrors. Or if the driver did look in his or her mirrors coming out of oak tree, they didn't process it. But that was the black run group at VIR. That should never happen in any run group. God forbid in black, right? Should never happen in blue or white, should never happen in black. Now, maybe the driver was new to VIR and we could make lots of excuses, but that's just totally unacceptable. But it's a perfect example of somebody not looking in their mirrors or looking in their mirrors and not processing it. So take your pick. So that's, what does it mean to look? So let's talk about, can vision be improved? Because that would be the natural next question, I would hope. And the answer, of course, is yes. So here's some ways to improve on-track vision. And this is the second section where I'm going to give you plenty of homework that you can use as little or as much of as you like. But we can improve our on-track vision simply driving on the street. I tell everybody, who drives on the street, and I, as a sidebar to this kind of stuff, I actually teach driver safety classes. I tell everybody to look at least 5 seconds ahead on the street. Most people look, if they're lucky, 1 second ahead. On the track, you should be looking 20 seconds ahead, according to Skip Barber. And actually on the street, you should be looking 15 to 20 seconds ahead. You can practice that. And if you're not practicing that on the street, start today or tomorrow. You can become aware of focus versus glance versus peripheral on the street, right? Where are my eyes focused? Where can I glance in the mirrors? What is my peripheral vision picking up? And God forbid, adjust the mirrors so you don't have a blind spot. I'll cover that in a moment. Secondly, we can do visualization, mental imagery. We can develop that mental picture of every corner on the track. You all have been to Lightning before. I think I can safely guess. And so you know what the corners kind of look like. Well, you can sit in your favorite chair, or you can think about it when you go to bed at night, but you can develop that mental picture of every corner. Exactly what does that look like? Ross Bentley has lots of tips on that kind of stuff. When you get to the track, you can practice with what's called deliberate practice. And I've provided on the website, and if you didn't see it there and you want it, send me an email or put your email in the chat, and I'll send you a link to the deliberate practice session worksheets, rather, that we've created for Lightning. They're ways to improve your vision at Lightning. And there's 3 of them. In fact, I'll show you those in a minute. And then there's some exercises you can use to improve your on-track vision. Now, I'm going to spend no time here. I'm just going to go through this because you can look at this later. How far ahead do you look on the street? In city driving, 12 to 15 seconds is a block. If you're on the highway, 1/4 of a mile is 12 to 15 seconds. Should be looking at least that far ahead. Look where we want to go. Adjust the mirrors, okay? Obviously, the seat needs to be adjusted correctly, but adjust the mirrors so that there's no blind spot. And here's exactly how to do that, okay? I'm not going to walk through this. It's on the slide. You've heard me say this before if you've heard me talk about vision and mirrors. I'm a broken record on this because so many people, and by the way, you should do this in every one of your streetcars. If you have not done this on your street car, you'll be shocked at how much difference it makes, how much better it makes driving on the highway. Here's what most people's rear side mirrors look like. That you can put a whole car, a big SUV in a blind spot. Whoops. If you do it correctly, there is no blind spot or a very small one. On my Cayenne, when a car approaches me on the left or the right, they're in my mirror, side mirror, until they're literally beside me. I mean, I can see, they're literally beside my shoulder, left or right. Same on my 968. So, most cars, you can either eliminate or drastically reduce the blind spot. Here's visualization, that mental picture. Here's exactly how to develop that mental picture according to how Ross Bentley describes it. Here's deliberate practice, the vision worksheets that are on the website. And if you need them, again, send me an email. I'll send you the link. But here's an example on the slide. How soon, how far ahead can I see the flag stations? What are my bailouts? That's an example, right? There's 3 of these. There's a bunch of questions for you to focus on each one. Here's it, here, actually they're in the slides. So if you downloaded the slides for tonight, I forgot I put them in the slides. Here they are. And then there's some exercises, one on focus, one on scanning, one on peripheral vision. Here's focus. Here's, focus, scanning, peripheral vision. So again, I'm not spending a lot of time there. Here's the summary of what we just went through. Bottom line, lots of ways we can improve what we see on the track and our ability to process it. I'm going to pause for half a second to take a breath and also see if there's any questions or comments before I shift gears. Okay. All right. So, of course, we can make vision better. We can also screw it up. How can we make it worse? Well, we can get in a rut and lose focus. If you're just going out to drive and not thinking about what you're doing, your mind can wander. Not a good idea. Worse is a pressure situation. If you're feeling too much pressure, for whatever reason, that's a bad thing. But as this interesting graph points out, there is sort of the optimum point of where we want to be. So get this slide to work here. All right, some reason it's not working. So if you look at this graph carefully, it shows an ideal zone. You want to be somewhere between your comfort zone and a stretch zone to get to your optimal performance. In other words, when we're driving on track, we want to be challenged, but we don't want to be under what this graph calls strain, too much pressure. And of course, at the top end here, that they call it burnout. But at the reverse end, if you're just going out in a rut and lose focus, you're bored, right? I mean, if you don't have any pressure, you're bored. So when we go on track, we want to be challenging our comfort zone, not too far out of it, but we want to be challenging it. And that applies to not just vision, it applies to lots of things, right? But that's how we ought to think about what pressure can do when we're on track. Now, what happens if we're under stress too much? We get tunnel vision. We lose our peripheral vision. We lose awareness of what's going on. Our reaction time slows. We're not as able to react to something that happens on track. So bottom line, if you're stressed or tense, either don't go on track, or if you do, really work hard at getting yourself relaxed. I could tell stories, I'm not going to, about people who went on track because they just got some bad news and crashed their car because their mind was elsewhere. Bad idea, really bad idea. Here's some tips on how to, if you're just trying to relax normal tension, here's the way to do it before we go on track. Now, if we're tired, we're less alert, and that's not a good idea, right? So the CDC says we affects our coordination, our judgment, and our reaction time. Pretty obvious, but some of us drive long distances or late to get to the track. If you're tired, if you get to the end of the day and you're tired, pack it in. There's always tomorrow. We can be distracted. Hopefully not like the guy in the picture, but we can be distracted again by something that, somebody just called us, or, somebody just said something to us and it's got our mind elsewhere. Bad idea to go on track if that's the case. So here's the alarm bells that should go off. If these things are happening, then, we ought to say to ourselves, either we're going to take it really easy this session, or we're just not going to go out at all, because these affect vision. They affect everything that we can do on the track. So let me just summarize. Vision is obviously important. There's lots of classic advice, but we've talked about much more sophisticated ways to think about how we look on track. The mental vision, the focus, the glance, the peripheral, and ways to practice to get a better view, emphasizing that situational awareness. Lots of ways to improve vision, lots of ways to screw it up. Okay, so I've provided links in the slides. If I'm not going to play these links, but if you want to, be humbled, these are two different Formula One drivers with eye tracking videos, and they show somewhat different dimensions of where drivers are looking, but it's pretty interesting. And they're doing things that are borderline superhuman, which you and I probably can't do. So questions, comments on any of that before we get to the turn by turn. But I went through that fast on purpose, gave you lots of material to look at.
That's good, thank you.
Thanks, Alan. Okay, thumbs up from Tibor, thank you.
Good stuff.
And Andy, okay. Any questions, anything that didn't make sense? Okay, all right. Okay, all right, so let me find the turn by turn. Okay. So, all right, so is there anybody on the call tonight who has not been to Lightning? I should have asked that before. And anybody willing to admit they've not been there before? I know most of you have, but I see we have 19 people on, so I'm assuming most people have been there.
Hey, Bill, I'm a greenie. I'm just here listening in.
Okay, all right. Well, I'll cover this in more detail for you on Wednesday, but you're more than welcome to listen in, because the slides are the same and a lot of the commentary will be the same. For if somebody talks about a really radical line, I'll try to highlight that.
Thank you.
Normal disclaimer on this as well. Passing zones, I think everybody knows this, but I'm not going to spend any time in this group. Passing on the right on the front straight and between 1 and 2, and most passing on the left, in the back curved straight, except right after turn 5, and then between 7 and 9. Passing depends on where you are. Overhead view, I'm not going to spend any time. There is a lap of lightning on the website and link to from the slides. So turn 1 at lightning. And I've attempted in this version of the slides, which you should have gotten if you looked at them, to actually draw in the line. Now, that's hard to do. Much harder to draw the line in for me than it is to drive it. I know how to drive the line. It's hard for me to draw it so it looks sort of accurate. But so you're going to see the disclaimer that the line's approximate on every one of these slides. But that said, turn 1 has a relatively late apex on the curb, a track out that's over the hill. But the nice thing, if you will, about turn 1 is it's uphill. It's pretty steep, actually, right? So guess what? We can turn in earlier than you otherwise could, a little bit, not dramatically. We can brake a little bit later. But since that hill is in the middle of the turn, if that hill weren't there, this would be a very dramatically different corner. But because the hill is there, we really have to get the turning done early because we need to be pretty much straight, either completely straight or very nearly before we go over the hill. Because guess what? If we're not straight going over the hill, we're going to go off the track when we go over the hill. And we can be on some power, but we can't be on full power. If this hill weren't here, we could be on full power at that point, accelerating. So we want to go over the hill about 3/4 of the way, track left, a quarter of the way from the left edge of the track, because track out's blind. You can't see it until we get to it. But the most important advice I can give to anyone at turn 1, or for that matter, any other corner on this track or most tracks, is if you end up, too early or too fast or offline, just drive the car off into the grass. There are 25 or 30 acres, I don't know, there's a lot of grass off to the left of turn 1. Enough room that you could screw that corner up dramatically and drive off in the grass and have no problem whatsoever. But God forbid you screw the corner up and try to keep the car on the track, you're going to buy the tire wall on the inside, like many drivers have, and many of you have seen that happen. So, this is not a corner to trifle with. Screw it up, drive the car off. No harm, no foul. But
Hey, Bill, I ask you a question about this corner?
Please.
When when I was earlier in my driving, you do sort of a traditional, you're braking, and then you're turning into the apex, and then you're full power over the apex and over. And that's a slower but safer way to do this. As I've gotten more advanced, what I've been doing is really doing it more like a fast corner where you're coming very fast off the straight. I slow down, but I'm actually almost on full power even before the apex, because what I'm doing is I'm getting slow enough that I can turn the car to get rotated and straight, but it's not a full brake. It's a much lighter brake. And then I can take a very fast straight line, right off the curbing and then straight through. I'm just curious about your thoughts about a faster line through, because you say it's a later braking point. I've actually been doing just less braking and then kind of taking it more as a fast right-hander almost.
Well, I think you're on the right path, but you're probably slowing more than you need to, because if you're able to get on the gas hard that early, then you've probably slowed more than you needed to. Now, that said, exiting the corner properly, getting the car lined up so that when the car does come over the hill, you're going as fast as possible without being out of control, so that when the car does settle coming over the hill, you can go to full power immediately. That's job one, right? Job one is the car comes over the hill and I can nail the throttle as soon as the car settles. That's job one. Job two, without screwing up job one, is how fast can I come over the hill without being on the power and having the car out of shape. So it sounds to me like you're doing a pretty good job on job one, but you probably have a little bit more entry speed that you can use. So unlike most corners like this, if this corner were flat or there was no elevation change, then how soon we can get on the gas would be paramount, right? That would be job one. In this case, that isn't the case. We can't get on the gas hard, in most cars, unless you have a very low powered car, until the car comes over the hill, settles down. And so be aware of how fast you're coming over the hill and work, sneak up on that, make very small adjustments, and you can probably gain a little bit on entry speed coming into one, because you can come into one carrying a lot of speed, trail in the brakes, get the car straight, get back on a little bit of gas, especially in a more powerful car, and then be ready to nail the gas as you come over the hill. Okay, great. And other questions, comments?
I was just going to say the thing that I find in turn one is that as you go into the you're running into the hill, that's the point where you can add steering, because you're getting a lot of compression and downforce on your tires. So you sort of bend in earlier, and then you can add steering kind of in the middle of the turn, and well before you get to the apex curving.
Yep. That's a good point, Doug. That's absolutely right. Yeah, hills are nice from that perspective, right? Okay. Anybody else? Okay, so that's turn one. So this is just what it looks like. You all know what this looks like approaching turn one. The apex is laid on the curbing. Some people like to use the curbing. There's sort of two levels to the curb here, a lower level and an upper level. I don't think anybody thinks using the upper level is a good idea. At least most people don't. But the lower level, will not upset some cars. It will upset other cars. So that's kind of your choice. Here's the hill. We know the track out's over the hill, and we can't see it from here until we get over the hill and the car starts to settle down. So turns 2, 3, and 4, which, in some ways challenge a lot of drivers at Lightning. I know this is a, complex that many of us, when we first started driving at Lightning, couldn't quite figure out. And I should have probably drawn the line on this overhead of all 3 corners, because they are all connected, and you cannot think about this section as one corner or the other. It's really, this whole sequence. Now, I hope many of you listened to Dennis Maschio last December, because he described exactly how to drive this section if you're an advanced driver. And I'll do my best to, communicate that, but he did it far better than I can. If you're observant and you look at this slide, or you go look at Google Earth, where I got this slide from, you can see the line. It's on the track pretty much, especially through 3 and 4. You can see where the dark marks are. Now, that said, let's break it apart. So turn 2, the whole idea in turn 2 is to lengthen the straightaway between 1 and 2, because 3 is slower than 2, right? And we got to slow down at 3. We don't necessarily have to slow down quite so much at 2. So, for most people, the apex of turn 2 is, call it 4 feet off of the curb, where the cone is sitting, not on the curb. I mean, yes, you can drive in on the curb and still make this work, but it won't be quite as fast. So call it 4 feet off, aiming at the outside, where you see track out here that's track out of 2. It's also turn in for turn 3. One big arc. Turns 2 and 3 driven properly are not 2 turns, it's 1 turn. It's one big arc carrying momentum, off of that fast section between 1 and 2. And, this just repeats what I just said. And when we exit turn 3, the apex that we're looking for turn 3 is the beginning of the curb on the right. In fact, we should drive right over the beginning of the curb. Hopefully I have a picture of that. So here we are approaching turn 2. There's a turn in cone in this picture. It's hard to tell in this photo whether I was actually 4 feet off or not. But we want to be kind of 4 feet off that 3 or 4 feet off that cone. Here's turn 3. You can see, I don't know whether we can see it. If I can get my computer to wake up here. Well, it's not, it's hard to see where I drew the line here, but, this one big arc, with whatever adjustment, minor adjustment, you might have to make it turn in, hopefully not much. Ideally, we want to run right over the leading edge pretty much of this curb, that's the apex curb of 3. And we want to approach 4. There's kind of 2 lines or 2 schools of thought. We can approach it mid-track, or kind of the right-hand half of the track, if you will, or we can forget about staying right and just go straight to the apex curbing of turn 4, which is what Dennis Maschio suggested. Ignore, staying track right. So, so here's approaching turn 3. Here's the apex. Here's that curbing I'm talking about. Forget the cone. Drive over the early part of this curb. And yes, if you're a student and we want you to kind of stay to the right-hand half of the track here, then the cone's better. But, if you have experience, you can drive over the early part of this curb and head, more directly for turn 4. And here's turn 4 from overhead. I drew the line in from a wider entrance, but you can obviously approach it from much sharper angle. And the reason that works, according to Dennis, is that the banking the camber is a little more favorable, and we can carry, and probably more important, we can carry more speed, through 2 and 3, and not have to scrub off as much speed approaching 4. And he claims we can, in most cars, unless you have a very underpowered car, we can make up any loss that might cause in 4 very quickly by getting on the power, given the favorable banking at the apex of 4.
Bill, can you go over the braking zones in this section?
Well, it's a very good question, Zoltan. And I don't have a good answer to it because it's very car dependent. In many cars, somebody.
Yeah. Yeah, sorry, it's Laszlo. Bill, I guess where you're going is that there's really no braking unless you really kind of screw up the line. And
No, well, that's not quite true, Laszlo. It depends. In some cars, like a modern Cayman, maybe even a modern 911, might not have to brake at all. They might just have to lift for 4,
yes,
right? And on the other hand, if you're driving really, really fast, and you really book it through turns 2 and 3, you may have to tap the brakes for 4.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's what
Okay.
I was saying, Bill.
Yeah, okay.
But I think, here, especially in the upper run groups, linking your previous presentation of mirrors and being fully aware of what's happening is very critical, because quite frankly, you can get a passing signal after turn 1 and you have a car behind you. So then you're probably going to have to stay to the right and not fully 4 feet off the apex. So there's a little bit of variability here. So we need to keep that in mind. But the important thing, as you were saying, is no matter how you approach turn 2, it really prepares you for turn 3. Whether you're staying in the middle or going all the way to the right, depending on your car speed and all that, really the importance is to be ready for turn 3, which is going to set you up for this whole complex coming 3, 4, and then getting to the right, not too far off the right side here, because turn 5 is going to be also very important. And 4 and 5, you can get one car by, depending again on the run group and the speed.
Right. Yeah. Now, for black and red run groups between 4 and 5, you can definitely send a fast car behind by. Yeah. The other comment I'll make about braking for turn 4 is depending on if your car doesn't like to turn, like my car doesn't like to turn much, I have to brush the brakes for 4, even though I might not have to do it to scrub the speed, but I have to do that to help the car turn. So Zoltan, to answer your question, many cars are going to have to tap the brakes at 4. Some cars, if they're set up well and driven well and all that, you may just be able to get by with a lift. But certainly the car has to work hard to turn for 4. You're going to have to figure out, what it takes to make that happen. But whatever it is, it's not much brake, right? We're not talking about slowing a lot. We're talking about, if anything, doing what we need to do to help the car turn for 4. But this section 2, 3, and 4 is a very, very challenging section, and in some ways, is a signature part of Lightning, more so than even the light bulb and all that kind of stuff. Okay.
Thank you.
You literally feel when you do it right.
Mm-hmm.
You can feel your car not fighting you. I mean,
Yep.
Seat of the pants, you're going to really feel Zoltan. I know we have similar cars, a little bit different horsepower and balance and everything.
Mm-hmm.
But it's one of those complexes. When you do it right, it's like riding a bike. You're going to start feeling it, and then you're going to start carrying potentially different speed and put the car a little bit to the right, to the left, depending on the situation and how you feel comfortable. And to Bill's point, if you overcook it, you're going to have to tap the brake. There's no ifs and buts about it. But usually just breathe the throttle to keep the car balanced a little bit, or not even that if you're going a that bit slower.
And last time I was on this track was with a car similar to Bill's. So I'm stuck in the middle.
Yep. Okay.
Thank
All
you,
right.
Bill.
Okay. You're welcome. So we've talked about all this, turn 4, lots of good grip at the apex, use all the track out, because turn 4 to turn 5 is a straightaway. It's not a real long straightaway, but we want to maximize the exit out of 4. That's really important. So if you screw up turns 2 and 3, at least make sure you get out of 4, quickly. So here's the approach to turn 4, more from the right-hand half of the track. Here's the apex. It's hard to see the camber here, and here's track out. But we definitely want to use the whole track width here, especially if you have horsepower, to get yourself launched off to 5. So turn 5, another challenging corner at Lightning. Not because there's a hill here, different dynamics than turn 1, but in this case, the apex is over the hill, right? So you can't see that in the overhead very well. And, you know, the other thing that's going on here is track out. Seems like it's a long ways away, but it's because the track curves back. The track goes in the wrong direction here. You know, if that curve after the apex were to go off to the left a bit, you know, this would be a lot faster corner after the apex. But anyway, so this is a really tricky corner, another dangerous corner because the apex is blind. If we want to line up the curb on the left before the turn in basically at the last red stripe. And again, just like turn one, we want to get the turning done before we go over the hill, so that we're pretty much straight as we go over the hill. And we want to be really tight on that apex, drive right over that curb. I even have my green students drive right over the curb, use all of the curb going over the hill. And obviously we're going to be careful. This hill, if anything, is more sharp than the hill at turn one. So if you have a powerful car, you know, we have to be careful. We have to let the car settle before we can really use the throttle. And we do want to use all the track out, but if you're coming down the hill in a powerful car and really going a ton, the track does come back. You can run out of track here in a powerful car because there's a little bit less room here than you might expect because of the way the track is configured. So, I mean, this corner done properly can be fun, you know, but people make mistakes here all the time by being early or more often by getting on too much gas too soon, or getting on a lot of gas without being straight going over the hill. Some combination of those factors.
It's very easy to light up your PSM light going over the top of that hill.
I'll bet that's right. The car gets very light going over the hill if you're on very much power at all. So, we're going to line up that curb on the left, to turn in. We just have to go on faith as to where the apex is, right? We talked about mental vision. This is a perfect example. Blind corner, you better have a good mental picture in your mind of where that line is, where that apex is, because you have no idea with your eyes where this apex is on this corner at this point. And by this point, we've finished 80-90% of the turning and we're back on some power. So when we do get to the top of the hill, now we can see the apex and we're driving right over that curb, and then eventually we make our way to track out. Now turn 7, the single corner at Lightning where the most people go off, the most people screw up. Why is that? I frankly don't understand it. This is a classic slow in, fast out corner. Nobody remembers Randy Pope's line, fastest way through a slow corner. Slow. This is not a fast corner, but it's followed by a long straightaway. And by the way, it's preceded by a long straightaway. So we need a lot of braking to get our way through this corner. Then you add to that a bunch of unfavorable things like the camber and some of that, which, and it's downhill in the braking zone. So this corner invites you, if you want to think about it, this is a sucker's corner. It sucks you in. It invites you to make a mistake. It invites you to overdrive. So let's talk about it.
Bill, can I ask you one question? The brake point. Can you go back a the brake point? You're coming through the overpass or underpass, whatever it is. Where is your brake point right there? By your arrow? The beginning of your arrow?
No, that's a great question, Alan. And I'm glad you asked it, because for most people in most cars, your brake point should be before the bridge. And the brake, I should have added that to the slide, because the brake markers are part of the suck you in part of this corner. the brake markers are too late for 90% of the cars that are going to drive this track. Maybe 100% of the cars. If you're
Wow.
maybe if you're in a Miata, they're okay. But for most of us, even for my car, I brake at the bridge, and
Okay.
I'm carrying a lot less speed than most of you are. So you're going to want to brake. You're going to want to brake. In most cars, by the bridge, if not before.
All right, great, thank you.
So that's a great question. I'm very glad you asked it, because it's one of those things I should have included. And one of the reasons that's critical is that the apex is earlier here than you might expect. I mean, this is not a shallow corner, it's a fairly sharp corner, but the apex is early. And the reason it's early is because of the camber. And this is one of the things Dennis Mascio explained that I'd never quite figured out, because I've never walked the track to figure out the exact camber. But the camber, it turns out, goes unfavorable right after, if you're late on your turn in or late on your apex, the camber is unfavorable. And so the favorable camber is when we turn in at the right point, right at the end of the curbing or just before it, and early on the curbing on the apex. Then we get favorable camber. In fact, Dennis said he accelerates between turn in and apex 7 miles an hour worth. Okay, a ton, right? And now I've not driven it that way, but and I don't have his skills either, but still, there's a lesson for all of us. So the slowest point of this corner is the turn in. Not like most corners where the slowest point is halfway between the turn in and the apex, or give or take, right? We want the slowest point at the turn in, which is why we want to brake earlier. Another reason to brake early here, not late. Because if we turn in properly and get the car turned, we take advantage of that camber, we get to that early apex, and guess what? There's a little bit of camber there. We can turn in a little bit more steering input and give ourselves tons of room for track out. So this is just like Doug mentioned for turn one, where we can give a little extra turn in when we get into the hill. Here we can give just a touch more turn in as we approach the apex, and help us, give us more room, to accelerate coming out. Because guess what? This is a slow in, fast out. We want to go fast out because this fast section comes out. So here's, approaching the bridge. We're well into the braking zone here after the bridge. The turn in is, pretty much the end of the curbing, somewhere on that last white stripe of the curb, right? The apex, it used to be up until 3 or 4 years ago. See the white curbing on the left here before the apex cone? That curbing was never there before. They added it, and it screwed up my reference point for this corner, because I used to aim for that first red stripe, for the apex. And I guess a lot of other people did, so they were hitting the dirt. So they put this white, this concrete curb, before the first red stripe. But the apex is somewhere on that first red, part of the curbing. Maybe the end of that, beginning of the white, but right around there is the apex. It's much earlier than visually one might think. And as I said before, if we get that early apex and we give a little extra turn in, then we have plenty of room at track out. Now, most people overdrive this corner. It's why everybody's in the dirt out there on the right. And that's not where you want to be.
Look at all the skid marks on the left hand, in the middle of the screen on the left.
Yeah, that's pretty spooky, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's people who got into the corner too fast, and rather than driving it off, if you get into the corner too fast, what do we want to do? In this case, what we should do is relax the wheel and let the car go off. But what are our, instincts tell us to do. Car isn't turning, I'm going to turn more. What happens?
Right. You go in that direction.
The car spins and we hit the tire wall or the Armco on the inside.
Okay.
So that is the classic get in the middle of the corner too early or too fast and lift and or turn too much and you go off on the inside.
Okay.
Yeah. If we know we're in the corner too early or too fast, drive it off. Whether you recognize a mistake very early in the corner or very late in the corner, doesn't matter. Drive it off. This is another case where there's a ton of real estate out here. There's no way you can drive off this corner and hit anything. There's a ton of ways you can make a mistake here and hit stuff. Just drive the car off. Lightning has plenty of runoff room on every corner for drivers that know how to drive the car off.
Okay.
But great question, Alan. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
So the light bulb or the bowl or whatever term you want to use at Lightning, there are two lines through the light bulb. The one I'll describe and that I attempted to draw here on the slide is what I would refer to as the inside line. And I like this line because you can carry more speed into the light bulb, quite a bit more speed, in my opinion, into the light bulb and spend less time kind of maintaining speed than the other line. But both lines work depending on your preference. In either case, take a really good look at the shape of this corner. It's more than 180 degrees, right? I mean, yeah, I don't know exactly what it is, but it's a very, very, very long corner. It's a big corner. And so we're in the corner a very long time, which means, there's a certain amount of time that we can't do a lot, right? So the inside line that I like minimizes the amount of time that's like that. The outside line, which I'll talk more about in a minute, spends a little bit more time. But regardless, the turn in, if you will, is like 10 years before the apex on this corner, right? That's what it feels like, because we turn in, we're looking for the apex. Where the heck is it? Et cetera, et cetera. It's a long ways away. We have to have a lot of patience on this corner. So let's talk about a few reference points. I'll come back to this. If we approach the light bulb on the inside line, I want you to, on this slide, to pay particular attention to, see if I can get my cursor to work here. It seems to have given up on me. Okay, see this white line here on the right side? That is a straight white line. That is the braking zone, or the beginning of the braking zone from, if you take the inside line. So when I'm driving here, I get on the brakes just before the beginning of that white stripe. And as I'm approaching, I'm aiming at this gap in the wall. Everybody see that gap in the wall? Fantastic visual reference point for when we're approaching the corner. We can aim at that gap from as soon as we come over the hill, approaching the corner, and we can line the car up on the right here with this white stripe. We can begin the braking, depending on how much braking you need to do, somewhere around there. And then literally, I describe this to people all the time, toss the car up into the banking. Okay, just let the car carry as much momentum as possible up into the banking, because guess what? We can't do anything at this point except get the car to turn a little bit eventually and wait a while before we can go back to power. So carry as much momentum as humanly possible up into the banking. And guess what? If you're carrying momentum up and you have some of that weight on the front tires, guess what? The car wants to turn, right? So it helps the car turn. So Now, the other thing we want to do at this point is we want to look to our right. And that means turning our head to the right as far as we can, because, even the wide angle, camera lens here doesn't even come close to capturing where the apex is. The apex is so far around, but the nice thing is there is a concrete culvert or drain on the inside of the arm cove that is usually visible from as soon as we're approaching the light bulb. If you turn your head and look, it is probably not precisely where the apex is, but it'll get your eyes around to look to where we want to go. So we want to be looking as far around to the right, turning our head, looking for that apex, and that'll help us do the gradual turn in that we need to do to feed the car down off of the middle of the banking toward the apex. And of course, eventually, we'll get to track out. So let me go back to the slide for a second. So I just walked through in the pictures on the inside line, what the slide says about the inside line. The outside line, which I don't have pictures of because I typically don't drive it, enters the light bulb from much closer to track left, higher on the banking, makes a big arc out of the banking. It's a slightly decreasing arc because of the nature of the corner, but the objective is to carry more speed. And this is claimed to be the Miata line through the corner. And I don't have anything to suggest that's not the case.
Last fall, there was someone in a Miata race car who was driving that line going crazy fast through the light bulb.
Yeah, correct. And so, yes, so I've known people in Porsches who've driven that line as well. I've never mastered it, so I can't really speak to it, but it clearly works once you figure it out. And if you wanted to try both, you'd have to try both and measure some data and figure out which one works. I personally have a bias to the shorter line, because it seems like you're adding quite a bit of distance to do the high line. But Doug, I've seen Miatas and others use that line and get around there very fast. So, and there is something to be said for it. And I have not done the A/B comparison to know which one works the best. So one of these days, maybe I should do that. So summary, lightning reminders. If you run wide in any corner, especially turn 1 or 5, drive the car off. Give 5 a lot of respect. 7, brake early. And I didn't talk about this, but pit in is right over the hill on the front straight. So the line coming out of the light bulb onto the front straight is track right, but that's where pit in is. And we've all been there, we know this. So it really requires a lot of attention, the front straight's blind as we come out of the light bulb. So, that's actually a fairly dangerous situation, especially if we're not paying attention. So with that, let me cut that off and ask if there's any other questions or comments before we wrap up.
Yeah, I think that, Bill, to that point, that's really an important part of the track, not only watching for folks pulling in, but also if you're giving a passing signal, because there's a little bit of a change of the track. So cars next to each other at that point where that white line is need to be cognizant we're not pushing each other potentially off the track as well. And you're step by step walking through the light bulb is very critical, linking back to the turn 1 conversation, because obviously it's going to set up the car for the long straight, the final approach speed, braking point, and everything for turn 1. Mm-hmm. So that's also a little bit of watch out as some of us dusting off the cobwebs and start going faster. We're going to have to be very cognizant of turn one, adjusting the braking points, carrying speed, all that stuff, because it can change very, very quickly as we get a little bit more comfy and believe that we are driving Formula One.
Right, right. And well, your point about giving a pass signal out of the light bulb is a good reminder, because yeah, if you give a pass signal as you're coming over the hill, the track comes back to the right. So if you're on the left, having given a pass, you can run out of track in a hurry there. So that's a good reminder. So any other questions, comments? Hopefully you found tonight helpful. I appreciate everyone hanging in there, and I look forward to seeing you all at Lightning.
Thank you. Good meeting. Very
Look
important.
forward to it. Thanks, Bill.
Thanks,
Always
Bill.
appreciate it.
Good night, all.
Thank you. Good
Bye, guys.
night.
Bill.
Thanks, Bill. Thanks, Bill.